Who did you most want to hear from last night after the president's State of the Union address? And I'm sure you wanted to hear from Rachel, as we all did, and we heard from her immediately on this network. And I'm sure many of you probably wanted to hear from the most famous freshman in the House of Representatives since John Quincy Adams, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we heard from her in an interview on NBC News and also here on MSNBC. But there were two people we did not hear from last night who I really, really wanted to hear from, and we're going to hear from them tonight, our first two guests. As I listened to the president describing North Korea as a tamed adversary ready to give up its nuclear weapons, and then describe Iran as the most dangerous country in the world, I really wanted to hear from the person who worked on both of those issues up close in previous administrations. Wendy Sherman has experience dealing with North Korea and the challenge represented by the possibility of nuclear weapons in Iran. As Undersecretary of State, she was in the room every day during the negotiations of the Iran deal that the Obama administration completed, which President Trump specifically attacked last night. No analysis of that speech is complete without hearing Wendy Sherman's reaction to the president's attack on what is the most important work of her life. But first, for every minute of the speech, and I mean every minute, there was one person who I kept thinking about, one person I kept wanting to hear from, and this is the first time that he's actually been number one on my list of people to hear from after a State of the Union address, and it was because of this tweet that he wrote yesterday. Trump has compromised our country's security in a million ways. His administration is an ongoing foreign policy garbage fire. It reads like what? A Michael Moore tweet? It's the kind of angry tweet that I see hundreds of every day, written by people who are just speaking from the gut on Twitter, people who are not necessarily steeped in policy expertise themselves, but just know that what they are seeing is what they would call an ongoing foreign policy garbage fire. That is angry stuff. Not at all surprising for a typical Trump opponent on Twitter, but for a United States senator? United States senator wrote that. I've never heard language like that from a senator in all of my years on the Senate floor as a Senate staff member. And when you know the senator who said this, it's all the more surprising because mild-mannered, respectful, that's always applied to this senator, who was a member of the House of Representatives during the George W. Bush administration and never said that about George W. Bush's policy. He was never pushed to that point where he called it an ongoing foreign policy fire. It took the Trump presidency to provoke that kind of rhetoric in this senator, that kind of written rage. The first time we saw this senator throw off his mild-mannered, polite Senate shell was when one of the most unbearable mass murders in America occurred in his state with a legally purchased assault rifle that murdered 20 kindergarten students and first graders and 6 educators in the school where those educators were trying to save those children's lives. The Sandy Hook massacre changed Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy.
The failure of this body to do anything at all in the face of that continued slaughter, it isn't just painful to us, it's unconscionable. I can't tell you how hard it is to look into the eyes of the families of those little boys and girls who were killed in Sandy Hook and tell them that almost 4 years later, we've done nothing at all to reduce the likelihood that that will happen again to another family.
Now, because the Democrats control the House of Representatives, the House Judiciary Committee held its first hearing on gun safety issues today. First hearing on that in almost 10 years. Now, that's progress, but it has been agonizingly slow progress for Senator Chris Murphy. Democrats in the House who are now in control of House committees with investigative powers were being chased by reporters today to get their interpretation of the strangest line in the president's speech last night.
If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi took that as a threat. She told reporters the president should not bring threats to the floor of the House. She is quoted in the New York Times saying, quote, "It was an all-out threat." Here is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, which is investigating the president today.
That's a non-starter. We are not going to be intimidated or threatened by the president to withhold any legislative advancement. If we do our proper oversight, we're going to do our proper oversight.
Here is Chairman Elijah Cummings of the Oversight Committee today.
When he said something to the effect that partisan investigations, it's not about partisan investigations. We are doing what is demanded by our Constitution.
And here's Chairman Jerry Nadler today. He's chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, the committee that has jurisdiction over the impeachment process.
To say that we can't do that is to say we shouldn't do our constitutional duty. It's to assert an executive preeminence that one would think he might want to be a dictator.
Tomorrow, Chairman Richard Neal of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee will hold his first hearings on ways to obtain President Trump's tax returns. And today, the House Intelligence Committee voted to deliver all of its certified transcripts of witness testimony before the committee to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller.
That includes transcripts that the special counsel and the Justice Department have not yet had access to, and a great many that they have, but have not been allowed to use for particular purposes, including in prosecutions for false statement or obstruction or perjury or any other like offense. So the special counsel's office, the Department of Justice, and its elements will now have access to those transcripts for any purpose which will facilitate justice.
If the president meant to intimidate Democrats in Congress last night with that strange line saying there cannot be war and investigation, it's not working. But today's reaction by the House Democrats has given us even more to discuss with the senator who says the Trump administration is an ongoing foreign policy garbage fire. And joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I have to say, when I saw your tweet yesterday, that is language that is that you don't find very much of in past usage in the United States Senate. But it made me wonder throughout the speech, what is Chris Murphy thinking to be calling it this garbage fire, and to listen to that speech last night? Was it what you expected it to be?
Well, listen, I guess I had very low expectations for the speech last night. It was maybe milder than I would have thought. He didn't, frankly, move us, backwards in terms of the ongoing debates we're having about trying to keep the government open and operating. But, Lawrence, I think the reason that I get upset, the reason why I use strong language when it comes to both national security and gun violence is that, our number one responsibility as a government is to keep people safe from harm. And so I get upset when 6 years after Sandy Hook, we haven't done a thing to meaningfully reduce the trajectory of gun violence. But I also get upset when this president is making our country less safe and more vulnerable to attack by the way in which he has withdrawn America from the world, the way in which he has partnered with murderous dictators like those in the Middle East, the way in which he has tried to create this impression that the Christian world is at war with the Muslim world, which just feeds terrorist recruitment efforts all over the world. So I do think that this administration's foreign policy has been a garbage fire, but that's because I think ultimately there's a lot greater likelihood that something really bad is going to happen to the United States if this president continues to withdraw America from the global stage and set up these dividing lines between himself and people that look different than him.
I want to go to that strangest line, possibly strangest line we've ever heard in a State of the Union address. I'm just going to say these words. I'm not sure I know what they mean or what they were intended to mean. The president said, if there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way. What was your interpretation of that?
Listen, there were many lines in that speech that I couldn't follow. That was certainly one of them. It sounded like a threat. It sounded as if he was saying that if you proceed with these investigations against me and my administration, then I'm not going to work with you on legislation that is important to the country, which is, of course, unacceptable and untenable. The other connection was between, I guess, the statement about war and the statement about peace. Listen, I think there's a caution for Democrats when it comes to some parts of Trump's foreign policy. Trump is not wrong to oppose these endless wars. He's not wrong to try to chart a path forward where we get out of Afghanistan and Syria. So Democrats shouldn't reflexively oppose every piece of Trump's foreign policy, especially when he's trying to bring some of our troops home. He's doing it in a backwards way. But I do think that there is a warning here for Democrats to find places on Trump's foreign policy agenda where we can try to refine his instincts so that they are for the betterment of the country.
Well, if the president seems to be saying there cannot be war and investigation, he says it just doesn't work that way. That is exactly the way it did work during the Watergate investigation. The Vietnam War was still going on and was going on after the investigation was over and after Richard Nixon had resigned the presidency. So we have seen that happen. And parenthetically, there was also legislation going on at that time. Congress was able to continue to act as a legislative body while just some members, in fact, very few members, were engaged in the work of the investigative committees of the president.
Well, and presidents will often make this argument that any time you are attacking them, you are making the country weaker. That just isn't true. It's never been true. It's our responsibility as a Congress to do oversight over the executive branch. And I would argue both on domestic matters and foreign policy matters. Just because we're questioning the president's wisdom in foreign policy doesn't mean we're making the country any weaker. In fact, I think the obligation is going to be on Congress in these coming years to represent the United States abroad if Donald Trump won't. So, yeah, this idea that somehow you're compromising America's national security by standing up to the president domestically has no parallel in U.S. history and is not exactly how the framers imagined the relationship would work.
Senator, I want to get your reaction to something the president said today about Congressman Adam Schiff, president, an avid television watcher, the most avid television watcher in the history of the presidency, pretends not to know who he is. Let's listen to this.
The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, said that he was going to launch a deep investigation into not only Russia, but...
Did you say Adam Schiff?
Adam Schiff.
Oh,
said
never heard of him.
Said that he would...
That wouldn't be partisan, would it? Would that be partisan? He's just a political hack who's trying to build a name for himself, and I think that's fine because that's what they do. But there would be no reason to do that. No other politician has to go through that. It's called presidential harassment, and it's unfortunate, and it really does hurt our country.
Your reaction to that, Senator?
Well, listen, the Mueller investigation has already returned countless indictments connected to the Trump campaign's connection to Russia during the 2016 election. And so we all know that there is significant smoke and possibly some serious fire to the president's involvement in what may have been an attempt to manipulate and steal a U.S. election. And so as Democrats, we're just doing what we think the country expects of us, which is trying to get to the bottom of all of this, trying to get to an answer so that the country can come to some conclusion as to what happened in 2016 and, frankly, what may still be happening now. Obviously, one of our great worries is that some of the most bizarre aspects of the president's foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia and Saudi Arabia can be explained by the president's existing financial ties, his family's financial ties to those countries. And so we have an obligation to get those questions answered. Now, let me say this. I think Adam Schiff hope that the answer is not that the president tried to steal the election, nor is he making foreign policy decisions based on his family's prospective income. So I'm not wishing for the end result of this to be a scandal that dwarfs those that already exist today, but we at least have to try to get to a conclusion and get to an answer.
Senator, before you go, let me just ask you a personal question about what it was like for you on the floor last night, because when I was working in the Senate, I saw Democratic senators on their their way to State of the Union addresses by President George H.W. Bush, and then for many more years I saw Republican senators on the way to the State of the Union addresses by President Bill Clinton. I never saw an angry senator on their way. I saw bored, both parties incredibly bored and thinking, how am I going to fake it, getting through this thing to make it look to the audience like I'm interested. When I read your anger yesterday, and I thought about you making that long walk over there to the House chamber to sit on that floor for what turned out to be an hour and a half of a speech that you were angry about before it was given. I just couldn't help wondering, what is it like for Senator Chris Murphy to be sitting there and sitting through this?
We've just never had a president who purposefully lies to the nation and uses big stages with all sorts of American pomp and circumstance, like the State of the Union, to perpetuate these lies. And so it makes me so angry about what this president has done to the institution, what he has done to some of the most sacred traditions that bind this country together. And so I am angry when I'm on my way to these State of the Union speeches, because I worry that we can't recover from this ongoing daily assault on objective truth. And when it happens on the most serious platforms, the State of the Union speech, it sends an even, I think, more serious signal to the country that our concern for what still remains of truth in this country is winnowing away even faster. So, yeah, I am angry. Listen, in the end, the speech wasn't as bad as I had expected, but I had pretty low expectations going in.
Senator Murphy, I have never seen an Irishman manage anger better. Senator Chris Murphy, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.